Greetings, my fellow free love sovereign thinkers. This is L3's newest podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful Swampy Mango, South Florida. And today's date is Saturday, July 21st, 2018. Yes, I'm in the heart of downtown Fort Lauderdale, just shooting the breeze in the middle of the parking lot here. Like a little cafe, parking lot, and all that. Real barren, but not too bad. Just got internet access, all that. So, yeah, it was just funny. I was like, looking at these memes of Trump and Putin and all that. It's hilarious. There's one I posted on my Facebook page about Putin. Found Russian operatives that were responsible for the elections. It had Obama, Hillary Clinton, David Watchman shows, and James Comey. I thought it was awesome. Like, I love all sides of the political satire, we can say. Many of them are, many of them we have to get a good laugh. It's all sarcasm. But there's others that take it too damn seriously, call him a traitor. I've seen this one video, Robert Reich called saves for treasonous with the Russians and so forth. It reminds me, someone brought up, and I remember too, reading about it, when they had someone actually posted a photo of John F. Kennedy, says wanted for treason, and they had posted one on Trump as well. It's almost the same photo with different faces. And it's interesting because even President John F. Kennedy was trying to do a truth of the Soviet Union. They called him a traitor for that as well. And when I was reading the stuff on what Pat Buchanan wrote about Trump stood his ground, less regulation and lowering taxes. Kennedy did something similar to that as well when you on lowering taxes on a federal level. Remember, when you lower taxes, you get greater receipts. It was proven, even in, like I said, when Kennedy was president around 1961, that was the same thing. And they are all, people are mocking the daylights out of that man. And you see the same thing with Trump on his whole Russian connection and so forth. And many of them, I know there's a handful, are really trying to say it was a majority. And these got folks out there just really just manifesting over this. Folks, you have to get a grip. It's a lot bigger than what Trump is doing. All right, he's just a pea in a pod. Yeah, his rhetoric may not be the best either. I'm not gonna defend it, but when it comes to this witch hunting game, your odds are all being duped. Same thing they did with Obama. Same thing they did with George W. Bush. And I'm not even crazy about these individuals based on their actions. You gotta think before you speak. Instead of manifesting. It's like something, they throw a bone at you. You just fetch for it. If someone hits a beehive, the bees attack. It's that same mindset. I recommend everyone out there to read Propaganda by Edward Bernays. Came out in 1928. I know I said it a few times, multiple times on my show. However, for those first-time listeners, and just to remind ourselves, put ourselves in check. That's pretty neat. And, of course, one person reminded me that when I said yesterday's show about South Africa, about half of South Africa is separated, and I actually should have clarified it as the Cape Province. And I thank her for that. So I always appreciate it. If you put me in check, that's great, because the human element, to be exact. There's times I just shoot my mouth and things just pop out of my mind. And you know what? It's good. I'm human. And I thank her for that. Thank the Auto Genes from Buddy List. Thank you, buddy. Good website to check out. BuddyList.co. If you're tired of Facebook and Twitter censorship, Buddy List is the way to go. So, yes. All right. Enough of the ranting. I'm going to be doing some commentaries and all that. It's almost early afternoon. And this one here came out yesterday by Becky Eckers. And it's interesting when everyone's trying to think this form of government would be the way to do it, and we got to get rid of the form of economics. You have to realize one thing for sure. Government is always the enemy of your liberty. And this is what she wrote. Merriam-Webster reports that socialism has become a trending word, i.e. lookups for have jumped over 1,500% following Democratic primary victory for a congressional seat in New York City by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And we're going to be talking about her as well. And I hope, though likely in vain, Americans did not conduct most of those lookups. If they did, they proved yet again on how dumbed down they are. Given that we've lived in a socialist country for over a century now, asking the definition of socialism is only a little less ludicrous than asking for that of television. If you can't recognize such horrors after suffering them all of your life, well, you are as devoted to scholasticism as any medieval monk. Meanwhile, we might assume from the barahaha over Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez triumph that she's the first socialist candidate in American history, or a contrary, though she is among the few to admit openly, heck, to outright brag of such evil intent. She only got, if I'm correct, she got like maybe like 30% of the votes, or like 30% of people in that district voted for her. So it's, I don't want to say it's a great achievement, with all due respect. But I'll continue on here. Since the 1930s, Americans have rarely elected anyone other than a socialist and their twins, communists, though the occasional fascist does sneak past them. Indeed, the clown of our hyphenated commie beat is as socialist as she. How would voters protect their beloved Social Security as well as socialism's other loot? Medicare and Medicaid, public housing, free indoctrination, education, food stamps, Obamacare, el crede ad nauseam. As its name implies, socialism imposes government forces on social and interpersonal struggles, which raises the question, how did a country devoted to autonomy, individuality, and freedom from that lethal enemy of both the state degenerate to de facto socialism? Who convinced Americans with their healthy and overwhelming contempt for political government that Leviathan was instead their friend, their doctor, their sugar daddy, their mama? Who persuaded them that politicians could and should fix entirely social problems rather than sticking to those traditionally considered governmental, such as dispensing justice, for more accurately injustice, ruining the trade via tariffs, and murder, aka war? Indeed, that fascinating query implies universally, not merely to the United States, local governments throughout history has been a lethal enemy, and its subjects usually feared is as such, which is only sensible reaction given to that state rests entirely on physical force. One analyst of it, widely but enormously attributed to George Washington, explains, government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. The true to this nature, governments in all times and all places have bullied and bossed, caged and conscripted. They were liable to torture and execute anyone even mildly challenging their authority. They impoverished commerce so the rules could live sumptuously. Few victims deluded themselves that despots exploiting them also cared about their welfare. Even so, government pretty much struck to several clearly defined roles. It battled foreign enemies, suppressed revolts at home, and plundered taxpayers to finance those activities as well as the rulers' luxuries. But for the kings and other tyrants to meddle with such social ills as poverty, illiteracy, racial hatred, or a lack of medical insurance, the peasants, those potentates regularly abused, would have scorned any suggestion as utter lunacy. Then some crackpots in the 19th century, France suggested that government trains its guns not only on foreign aggressors and domestic criminals, more often more dissident, but on interpersonal problems. And they did, with mumbo jumbo as well as breathtaking innogience towards rationality. Their ringleader, Charles Fourier, comes off as a confused thinker whose ideas quite fanatical without ground in reality, pure nonsense with the characteristic pretension of the visionary, contradictory, confused, repetitive, chaotic, and of course, long-winded. And this from this passionate lecture from the modern European intellectual history. To be fair, Führer professed an interest in ameliorating the misery he saw around him, which he and many others wrongly blame on the industrial revolution, and this bizarre solution, such as flannexes, which are experimental. They are places that combine families that are unequal in fortune. These buildings were designed to accommodate a person's passions and talents. A friendly union would be formed between the people because of the similarities they all shared. Creating happiness and cheerfulness within the society seemed to have been voluntary at first, but it is as typical of do-gooders. Führer soon insisted that his socialism would have to be enforced. Only a confused thinker of this magnitude could have urged such as a ridiculous contradiction that government, which relies on physical compulsion, should repair society which functions well only in absence of physical compulsion. What Führer advocates was akin to claiming doctors can heal a fractured leg by smacking it with a sledgehammer, or as Frederick Bastiat put it in the classic The Law, socialism confuses the distinction between the government and society. The untenable combination of the two diametric opposites, government and society, philosophically invalidates Fourier, and all socialist, communist, fascists, and progressives before and since. Worse, when your tool is a hammer, everything looks good as a nail. Statists reflexively believe that only their God, government, can mend whatever's broken. Ergo, they condemn as irresponsible and impossible, leaving private trouble to private citizens for resolution. No wonder Bastiat also observed, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we could object to this being done at all. The more things change, the more it stayed the same. Even in 1850, when Bastiat wrote The Law, socialists were guilty of the same logical absurdities then that characterize them today. We disapprove of state education. Bastiat explained that the socialists say we are opposed to any education. We object to a state religion. That the socialists say we want no religion at all. We object to state-enforced equality. Then they say that we are against equality, and so on and so on. Indeed, we object to Obamacare. The socialists say we want people to die in the streets. Now, to be very honest, Obamacare is very fascistic, but I understand. I'm not arguing what this person's saying. Has some valid points here. What is socialism? Nothing more than mixing apples and oranges to cook up paradise, a recipe for disaster. And what Becky's actually saying is that when you leave it to the hands of the government, things turn to crap. It has been going on for a very long time. All you got to do is study history. And everyone talk about blame capitalism this, capitalism that. On what way? Open free market or state capitalism? Or, in other words, neo-mercantilism. And some people can't even comprehend that. Look what happened in Detroit, for an example. Very good example of government knows best. Try to tax the crap out of everybody and do over-regulations in their city. That's part of it, neo-mercantilism. Of course, globalism put that city to bankrupt as well. So those are forms of economics they had. All you got to do is read, my friends. And on the Mises Institute, they talk about that. Murray Rothbard talk about neo-mercantilism and brought up Detroit as an example that's doomed to fail. You look it up. I think it came out around 2001. He wrote that. Very intriguing indeed. And I don't argue on Facebook over. I just post that and say, hey, give us a read, folks, about what happened in Detroit. The capital happened in Detroit. Boom. Send that to them. And you know what? It's not to argue or scream and yell at the top of your lungs. Just get people to think. Educate one another. That's the name of the game. And look what's happening in South Africa right now. With their propaganda. And I should have brought this up yesterday. The government knows best. We want to take people's lands and all that, and it's like apartheid revisited. Lucky Dubé is rolling in his grave. I guarantee you that. I can say that because I worked his show 1995, if I'm correct. Up the road here, a place called Mill Ponds Park. It's a reggae festival. Lucky Dubé was one of the artists. He said when the apartheid was over, he goes, it's time to live in harmony. It's time for the whites to educate the blacks and vice versa. Educate one another, live in peace and harmony. Now, you got a bunch of parasites out there too. They're trying to tell people what to think, how to wipe their rear ends, and this is why Cape Province has seceded from South Africa. Hopefully all of you, I'm not messing this up. And I say that out of love. But that's one of the things, my friend. Government in Latin means control of the mind. And this is why you never trust them. And I do digress. On the contrary, speaking of Alexandria, the girl from the Bronx, made some big talk shows. Donald Trump, he's been cleaned up from the Bronx. Woo! And everyone's like manifesting. But Mises made a question about it. Well, how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez misunderstands American poverty. This came out the 18th a few days ago by Aaron Moran. Democratic socialism is in the news again following Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's stunning victory, helping her become a darling of the mainstream media. Americans are becoming interested in democratic socialism again, a philosophy that involves voting to steal your stuff. Two key planks of democratic socialism are to rail against the rich and promise everything for free, which then leads to the next question: who's going to pay for all that free stuff? Remember, if you study the Great Depression, you want to tax the rich, and it went to crap a lot more, economically speaking. Building upon her national spotlight, Ocasio-Cortez recently appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert to discuss her political brand of a wide array of issues important to her and the socialists everywhere. But there was one moment in the interview that opened up a can of worms. She told the alleged comedian, "For me, democratic socialism is about really the value for me is that I believe that as modern, moral, and wealthy society, and no person in America should be too poor to live. I think that no person should be homeless. If we can have a public structure and public policy allow people to have homes and food and lead a dignified life in the United States." So, it sounds like low-income projects on federal taxes, right? Ocasio-Cortez may be the politician with good intentions, but that's the most dangerous type of politician. She's suggesting two interesting things. The poor are destitute, and poverty can be cured with even more government. Let's explore further. What is poverty in America? There are 3 points that the left likes to make. The poor are getting poorer. The U.S. has the highest childhood poverty rate, and 32 million Americans are impoverished, higher than when the first bullet in the war of poverty was fired. How dare the U.S. create such horrific conditions that are a resentment of Charles Dickens' novel? If you're an ingredient in the U.S., then you're better off than most people in the world. A hipster, so sporting a Che Guevara t-shirt and drinking a Starbucks, would scoff at that assertion, but it is the truth. But this is the truth. Income inequality is a myth. While income mobility is still a thing, yes, it is sure that the top 1% are getting richer, but the poor and the middle class are becoming more prosperous too. Why is this a debate of fact? The problem is with how the data is compiled and analyzed. When we study Census Bureau data or any other information emanating from the government, we simply compare rich Americans and poor Americans in 1 year and the next. The better route is to examine the data over an extended period. When you do, the bottom 20% witness their incomes rise, and most Americans will see their income status change throughout the years. Half the country will be in the top 10% of incomes for at least 1 year, while 2/3 of Americans will park themselves in the top 20% for at least 2 years. Now are American children worse off than Asian European kids? Not quite. When Sanders and others make that claim, it can easily be disputed if you take a look at an Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. The U.S. is ahead of Russia, Israel, China, Spain, and several others. Denmark and Finland have the lowest. How could the biggest economy in the world will not eradicate poverty for both adults and children? Well, perhaps it's time to examine what being poor in America is like compared to other places. It is correct to state that the U.S. has a higher poverty rate than other developed nations. However, Americans poor have higher median incomes than in other countries, and in poverty income in the United States matches the median income in Spain, the UK, and Japan. Plus, Americans' living standards are higher for the poor than the inconvenience residing in UK, New Zealand, France, and Japan. Yes, I've been in Japan. They do have a major homeless issue within the big metropolitan cities such as Tokyo and Osaka. That's like 21 years ago to be exact. Let's look at what is reality like be poor in the land of free. 80% have air conditioning. 94% have internet access. 75% have an automobile, and a third have 2 or more vehicles. Half of poor families have a video game system. 66% have cable television. What about the basic essentials like food and housing? That's easy enough. 83% of poor households report having enough to eat. 96% of underprivileged families report their children were never hungry at any time. 42% of poor households own their homes. Moreover, the average poor American has more living space than the average middle or high-income person in the UK, France, and Sweden. Also, consumption of vitamins and minerals is the same as those in the wealthier brackets. Should America fall in hard times, they have an access of a generous welfare system paid for by the private sector, despite the claim that the U.S. allowed pensioners to perish on the streets or starve in their homes. The government has spent trillions of dollars over the last 50 years of entitlements, health care, social benefit programs. Rectitude and efficacy of welfare can be debated, but government gives citizens money to purchase unhealthy foods and smartphones, and a basic income guaranteed is all but inviolable. That's how wealthy the U.S. is. It was originally published at Liberty Nation. There's interesting stuff there, too, because you have to always got to look at things in a bigger picture. And don't get me wrong, hey, I'm off the grid, living, I'm working. I'm living off the grid, working, urban camping, you can say that, which is all well and good. I have my little rough areas, but you know what? It's okay. It's not the worst thing in the world. I am working, making a living. And I have my seasons of slow as well, but you know what? We'll have our moments, but the truth of the matter is, things can be better. Hey, I can say this: since the United States is in a fiat system, there's a lot more potholes that gotten deeper. But I'm not going to blame it on capitalism. The last, to me, is pretty absurd. Because one thing you got to look at too, my friends, government and the banks are great parasites of society. And I know there's one good video to check out by Mike Adams. He talked about government parasite of society, and really good. I recommend everyone to check that out because it has a lot of great merit. And we're going to do this one right here. We're speaking of government and how in the banks. It's by Bob Livingston, which is same, but there's Bob Livingston Alerts. Good ride. I always love this crew's work. The team he has. A lot of great facts, a lot of great merit. And it says here how banks and the government rob you blind. Is Bob Livingston himself. Theft comes in many forms. The most obvious occurs when thugs stick a gun in your face or a knife in your back and demands you hand over your wallet, or when a burglar enters your property and absconds with your valuables while you are away. It also happens much more covertly. A person or a business may commit fraud. One of the greatest fraudsters of all was Bernie Madoff. His scheme made Charlie Ponzi's look like a penny ante poker. Ponzi offered investors an opportunity to earn profits for 50% to 100% by buying discounted postal reply coupons in other countries, primarily Italy, and redeeming them at face value in the United States. Like all pyramid schemes, promised profits materialized for initial investors. Because of that, along with a favorable article about this scheme printed in the Boston Post, new investors were flocking to his door at such a pace he was raking in $250,000 a day. Woo! He was paying initial investment money from his new ones. The scheme collapsed, costing his investor $20 million, $237 million in today's dollars. Thank you, fiat, right? Madoff's scheme involved computer programs creating phony trades and manipulated account statements. He later told investigators that he was depositing client money into a bank account rather than investing it and paying clients who wanted to cash out with money from the new deposits. Estimates of his total fraud range from $17 billion to $65 billion, depending on who was estimating. Government, banker, paper money, and now mostly computer symbols is just another Ponzi scheme, a system of organized theft. Paper money credit was created to transfer wealth to the government, bank, and establishment without payment. Every new dollar put in circulation dilutes your dollars and your imagined savings. But the process is so slow. When a couple with steady saturation of propaganda about our high-sounding democracy, few people ever catch on. The crowd has been dumbed down. Even most bank employees don't understand they are engaged in theft. They, like the most of the rest of Americans, don't understand and they don't care as long as they have bread in circuses. Fractional reserving banking is a government-approved Ponzi scheme. Banks had only a fraction of your money in an account, and they don't have reserves on hand to cover all debt owed them by their customers, and all saving customers have deposit. In other words, banks are bankrupt except to the ability to create money. Here's how the Federal Reserve explained this. The fact that banks are required to keep on hand only a fraction of the funds deposited with them is a function of the banking business. Banks borrow funds from their depositors, those with savings, and lend those funds to the bank borrowers, those in need of funds. Banks make money by charging borrowers more for a loan, a higher percentage interest rate than is paid for depositors for use of their money. If banks do not lend out their available funds after meeting their reserve requirements, depositors might have to pay banks to provide safekeeping services for their money. For the economic and the banking system as a whole, the practice of keeping only a fraction of deposits on hand has an important cumulative effect. Referred to as a fractional reserve system, it permits the banking system to create money. Here's what else the Fed says about reserve requirements. Reserve requirements are the amount of funds that a depository an institution must hold in reserve against specified deposit liabilities within limits specified by law. The Board of Governors has sole authority over changes in reserve requirements. Depository institutions must hold reserves in the form of vault cash or deposits with the Federal Reserve banks. Those reserve amounts are set by complicated formulas depending on the net transaction amounts of the bank in question. Based on the formula, a new bank can open with a small amount of invested capital, have zero net transaction accounts, no money on deposit, and immediately lend up to $9.3 million by simply creating money on a computer. In a column he wrote in 1995, the latest economist and author Murray N. Rothbard explained the bank's operation this way. I set up a Rothbard bank and invest $1,000 of cash, whether gold or government paper does not matter here. Then I lend out $10,000 to someone for either consumer spending or to invest in his business. How can I lend out far more than I have? That's the magic of the fraction in the fractional reserve. I simply open a checking account amount of $10,000, which I'm happy to lend to Mr. Jones. Why does Jones borrow from me? Well, for one thing, I can charge a lower rate of interest than savers would. I don't have to save up the money myself, but can simply counterfeit it out of thin air, a la fiat. In the 19th century, I would have been able to issue banknotes, but the Federal Reserve now monopolized note issues. Such demand deposits at the Rothbard Bank function as an equivalent to cash. The nation's money simply has just, by magic, increased by $10,000. The inflationary counterfeiting process is underway. If the banks can do it, it's legit. And of course, you got all these quacks. Even Eric Holder. I remember he said he maybe running for president in 2020. The banks are too big to bust because he is a bend over Bob. Watch that, buddy. So let's say that you borrow $200,000 at 5% interest on a 25-year note from the bank mentioned above, the one with no money on deposit to buy a house. You make a monthly payment of $1,169.18 to the bank in the form of your mortgage payment. By the time you have paid off your loan, you have to pay the bank a total of $350,754.02. In other words, the bank has now profited in the tune of $350,000 from you on money that never existed. And should you have defaulted on your loan, not only would you have lost whatever money you had prior to the default, the bank would own your home outright through a repossession. Do you remember all these foreclosure scandals, my friends? Yeah, exactly. The Federal Reserve, which is neither a federal agency nor does it hold any reserves, work this way by lending money to other banks through an either mark of a ledger, sheet, or a computer. By computer transfer, real money never changes hands. But rather than create actual wealth except for themselves, central bankers as money creators also destroy the currency. It is inflation. Inflation is not rising prices, which most people are led to believe. Rising prices are a symptom of inflation, not the cause. Inflation is an expansion of the money supply, i.e. the creation of money out of thin air. Yes, it's happening right now around the world. Look what happened to Argentina in the 90s. And how about the fall of the Reichsmark in Weimar Republic of Germany in 1928, around the time 2029 era. Absolutely. Look who got into power. Adolf Hitler became chancellor. Something to look at, my friends. How does inflation steal your wealth? It is the perfect crime. It is as simple as concept as supply and demand. With more money chasing fewer goods, more and more money is required to make a purchase. And if you put your money in a certificate of deposit in the bank that pays less interest than the rate of inflation, then your bank savings lose money. It's like pouring water into milk. The more water you pour, the less milk is left. Everyone is hurt, particularly those on a fixed income. The more money that's spewed out, the more worthless each one, the paper dollar, is. In the past 100 years, the dollar has lost 96% of its value. Put another way, what is now more than $25 to buy what would cost $1 in 1913. That's right. Since your pension or Social Security comes in U.S. dollars, what happens during a period of hyperinflation, as we certainly expect to occur as a result of the massive Fed money printing venture? It loses value because it is a domino dollars, not real money dollars like precious metals. Social Security represents a debt of the federal government. Governments get rid of debt by inflating it away, printing more money. In short, the government can and will kill Social Security liability by inflating it away. Ditto for savings. A study of monetary history shows that hyperinflated currency destroys the purchasing power of savings accounts and Social Security. That is why I recommend you preserve your labor, your savings, and retirement with gold and silver in your possession. Precious metals do not pay interest, you say. This is conventional thinking backed by the paper money myth. Gold and silver are only real money in existence. They are real money as well as intrinsic wealth. Moreover, gold and silver appreciate in purchasing power as paper money appreciates. That's your real interest. All understand that hard money has been lost down the memory hole of the fiat paper world money regime. Look at it this way. If you take in $2 silver dollars and the $1 bill in 1964 and place them in a box for safekeeping, what would they purchase today? With the silver coins, you could buy about $12 worth of goods or services, say 7 gallons of milk or 6 loaves of bread. With your dollar, you could buy only $1 worth of goods. So which is real money? I love my country, but I hate my government. I know that my government and my country has been stolen by the money creators. And you know what? He's absolutely correct. So all you folks out there want to blame the parties, for inflation and all that. You're just being duped and spinning your wheels. That's why a lot of folks go into this cryptocurrency craze. And I'm not gonna condemn it, but like I always tell all my friends out there, never leave all your eggs in one basket. So that's a good thing, good and bad. But I know others, they're saying the bankers are, some of the bankers are involved in that entity as well. So you gotta be vigilant. And even a lot of the states around the country are actually having laws now. They can do certain transactions with gold and silver. And even every state in the union should be doing that under Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution. All you gotta do is read, my friends, okay? So one of those areas, you do is be vigilant, know the facts, because the past is today's greatest teacher. So study history on this, and trust me, you go a lot longer, and you're aware of what's happening in your surroundings. So always remain vigilant in these circumstances, whether it's from big government, tribal government, or central banksters. And remember this: Karl Marx loved central banking. So did Alexander Hamilton. Tweedledee and Tweedledum, right? Precisely. All right, I'm going to do one more here, my friends. And this one came from Freedom Outpost. And it's interesting, by Tim Brown, came out yesterday. This man should have gotten 14 years in federal prison when the judge knew the prosecution had broken the law. The corruption during the Brendan Ranch trial was so bad that prosecutor Meyer didn't want to let the defense defend themselves, and Navarro sided with the prosecution. As far as I'm concerned, she is worthy of impeachment, and this latest episode, even allowed to Meyer in the courtroom, demonstrates that. On Thursday, Judge Gloria Navarro sentenced Todd Engel, who was convicted of 2 charges during the trials involving men in the 2014 Bundy Ranch standoff, to 14 years in federal prison, and failed to reference one time the fact that she dismissed the final Bundy trial due to violations of the law by prosecutor Stephen Meyer, who was actually allowed to be part of the prosecution's statements during Engel's sentencing. What? In a report from Sherry Dalvo at Redoubt News, she believes, as does Engel, that this conviction would have never been given if it were not for a Facebook post. It has been determined that Engel's actions during the protests were nonviolent. He is shown in photographs and through testimony to have attempted to peacefully resolve the situation with the Nevada Highway Patrol. However, before traveling to Bunkerville, Engel and several others made Facebook posts on his account that were considered over the top. Engel spoke on his behalf, asking the judge to take into consideration for his nonviolent actions at the standoff, apologizing for his part in asking for mercy. Even was clear that it was not for Facebook, he would not be staying in that courtroom. He was being sentenced for a typical social media posting, not for his actions during the event. The judge took a hard stance and stated that she did not believe his remorse. If that was then, she pronounced sentence, as though the thrust of the corruption tolerated under the current administration via Jeff Sessions' Department of Justice. Stephen Meyer was actually allowed to be in the courtroom rather than be arrested and charged with crimes against Engels and others. Again, Duvall reports the prosecution team of Daniel Scheist and Stephen Meyer, the first consisted of she's denigrating Engel through his monologue, with Meyer having every appearance of not being allowed to speak from the second chair. Majority of hearings arguing by the prosecution for more time in the sentencing. The prosecution asked for as much as 262 months, nearly 22 years, and the defense countered with good arguments for time served. Scheist made several statements that indicated the prosecution's position was that citizens should not challenge their government under any circumstances. Oh man, that is so funny. What would Thomas Jefferson say? A little rebellion now and then is good, Mrs. Like I said, one thing about Scheist, He's one big bend over Bob. Yeah, I'm a governmental Uncle Tom. You find me amazing, honey? When someone like Cliven Bundy loses in court, he may be upset, but that does not give him the right to call for a militia to respond. Shice also talk of the special protections that are given to police officers, with only exception being self-defense. They're so special. So effing special. Exactly. What is interesting about the statement is that the defendants, including Engel, were not allowed to use self-defense argument during the trial, though there was evidence for it. Judge Navarro has even have referenced his argument in her rulings against the prosecution's request for a new trial. However, she did not allow Engel to use this argument, even though she has cited specifically previously. Several references were made to other instances that Engel was not convicted, including the Mahler Wild Refuge in Burns, Oregon. Engel traveled to the refuge with specific intent of asking Amon Bundy to leave the refuge before anyone got hurt. Just the fact that Engel traveled to Oregon seemed to be enough for Daniel Shice to convict him for that protest. How manly is that? Additionally, the pre-sentencing report referenced charges that Engel was indicted for but never convicted. It would seem that in federal court, a defendant can be sentenced to serve time for a fugitive ham sandwich if the government chooses. Indictment is enough. Conviction of all charges is not necessary. Duvall pointed out in the follow-up post, Engel was convicted of what Navarro described as two lesser charges consisting of obstruction of justice for his time on the bridge above the Wash and interstate travel in aid of extortion. Travel from Idaho with intent to aid in extortion. However, Engel was sentenced to charges of which he was not convicted. Navarro specifically referenced an assault among other charges when determining his sentence. Engel questioned this during his time to speak. Navarro stated that he did not understand the justice system, in which they have a different standard for sentencing during trial. Navarro said, though the jury was hung on the remaining charges and the prosecution chose not to retry him on these charges, this did not make him innocent of the charges. Therefore, they used these additional charges to determine the sentence. You see, I hope you folks understand what happened here, all right? This means that you can be indicted for a multitude of crimes, convicted for a single crime, yet to be sentenced for other crimes as well if the judge chooses to do so. Can we say a due process? Yeah, we call that treasonous. Come on, you folks that hate Trump so bad, call him a treasonous fool. How can you do this to Judge Navarro? Judge Navarro is a treasonous Aunt Jemima. Bye. Deep down inside, she knows I'm right. I will continue on here. It's another gross miscarriage of justice. Seriously considering the criminal actions of the prosecution and what I see nothing more than a complicit judge in the matter. Engel should have at least had a retrial with all the evidence presented and the jury be instructed that the prosecution had committed crimes against him to keep him from having a fair trial, something he did not receive. It's absolutely violating Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. I dare call the prosecutor and Judge Navarro treasonous. Benedict Arnold was a lot more patriotic than these dodo brains. Garbage. Pure garbage indeed. Furthermore, the misrepresentation by the prosecution, namely Shice, and the sentencing is over the top. I think absolutely does carry weight that the Bundys called in friends and militia when they noticed that snipers were set up around their house and all other bunch of cows and the Bureau of Land Management, as well as the FBI and the prosecution, sought to deceive the court and the jury about that. There's no doubt the federal government's goons were threatening the lives of the Bundy families or at least intimidating them. Engel left the courtroom stating, freedom is not free. Engel should have been given a retrial, as should Greg Burleson, who was convicted of several charges, considering the fact that Judge Navarro, a Barack Hussein Obama Cerrado Cervera appointment, knew that the prosecution withheld evidence that could have been used to find these men innocent. However, the government will not give them a retrial. The corruption during the Bundy Ranch trials was so bad that prosecutor Meyer didn't want to let the defense defend themselves. Yeah, prosecutor. Yep, another butt boy indeed. Navarro sided with the prosecution. Yep. and Jemima to the system. As far as I'm concerned, she's worthy of impeachment, and this is the latest episode of Injustice demonstrates that. I'm just wondering if she's related, if she's related to former Sheriff Nick the Prick Navarro. Remember him? Remember that show Cops? Yeah, he started that. I'm just wondering if she has an I Love Fidel Castro button too, or an altar in her chambers. As far as I'm concerned, she is. I already said that. On the final note, the trial of the defendants in Bunkerville standoff was not the first time Steve Meyer had broken the law and violated the rights of other defendants. Allowing this man to serve in any capacity of prosecution is not only a joke, but as an open demonstration of hypocrisy of the Department of Justice and Judge Navarro's court. Continuing to allow him in the prosecutor's office only hardens him in his criminal case. Though he was quietly demoted after the DOJ investigated his office, he still remains under influence to help prosecute. I say prostitute, okay? It's a prostitute. Even though Judge Navarro has deemed he and his office broke the law, here is Andrea Parker, wife of Erica Parker, with more details on the sentencing. So there's links for that as well. And as far as I'm concerned, it's self-explanatory. But I'll tell you one thing, friends. This is why you got to pay attention to these vultures. All right? I consider Mr. Engel, Todd Engel, a political prisoner. I'm going to put a website on there. I think it's called Jubilee 776. Or I Hate the FBI. IHateTheFBI.com. Just give you an example. And it'll take you to Jubilee 1776. Jubilee year, I think it's called. And you'd be very surprised what these people could do. And even had the guy in Walls Ulrich, there's some say he got was involved in drug trafficking, child pornography. I wouldn't be surprised if the federal government was involved in that too. The FBI. Remember, J. Edgar Hoover was so fascinated with the Nazis, how to collect information. He had to actually sent two of his agents to Berlin to figure out how he can do it. And that's why he's been in power for about 42 years. Think about that. That's what the FBI is all about. The post-Third Reich legacy. Plain and simple. I'm not saying anyone in that organization are bad folks, but they're caught up in that cesspool of tyranny. Like I always say before, government in Latin means control of the mind. You don't trust these people. And that's why jury nullification is essential. But what Judge Navarro did, she should be sentenced for contempt, perjury, and breaching her oath. Including the Dinkleberry, Tinkerbell himself. Prostitute Meyer. Call him prostituter. He had a bunch of prostitutes. Stephen Meyer. Myhre. So he is the enemy. He's a Palmolive's version of Benedict Arnold. At least Benedict Arnold is more of a man than he'll ever be. If you don't like it, too bad. Prove me wrong. That is it. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or you're saying something that's interesting, man, I want to check out, whatever you do, please address your correspondence with decorum. You keep me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Tumblr, YouTube, Freedoms Network, Minds.com, FutureNet.club, Patreon.com/Look 3 or 3 Eyes, Gab, which is gab.ai, yours.org, oneway.com, and buddylist.co. In addition, you can email me at lookinluck3@gmail.com, or to your cryptic ones, especially with the ProtonMail account, lookinluck03@protonmail.com. All right, my friends, once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is helpful for the soul and liberty humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves, keep on spreading love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.